I have to say something now that probably a lot of people would be irritated with, but we did. You see, you have to consider the realities of the clients. In this case, the government agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to consider actually what it is that you think you're working with. And so what Puthoff and I did was decide that whatever psychic perceptions consisted of, that they did consist of perception. So it didn't really matter if the source of it could be called psychic or not. The stuff to work with were the perceptual processes in the human being. Mm-hmm. So we converted over to perception studies rather than psychic studies. And there's an enormous, at that time there was an enormous literature about perception, and it was quite well understood scientifically that perception can be expanded by simply working with it. And in fact, when he and I put together our first proposals, we did it from the angle of perception because, there were going to be oversight committees and all kinds of people inspecting this, and you had to show why one would be justified for looking into this kind of perception. So we used perceptual studies, and in fact, it turned out several years later that what we were doing was increasing perception, the parameters of perception, and so we just eliminated the word psychic from it, and so forth and so on.
Perception equals intuition?
Perception equals anything that you can perceive. And, of course, you don't even need to call it intuition. It's only intuition if it's not based upon physical types of things,
Well, is it for the regular person, the regular Joe walking down the street, every now and then, fairly intuitive people will have a very strong feeling about a decision that looms ahead in their life,
yes.
An intuitive feeling. Is that what we're talking about?
That's the construct of processing information to the point where it becomes perceptible. If that person didn't have high stage perceptual factors working for him, then they wouldn't experience that kind of thing.
As opposed to logical deduction.
Right. Now, in considering perception, you have to understand that it can be closed down. There are all sorts of processes that can be used to limit a person's perceptual faculties. So if they can be closed down, such as in hypnosis and brainwashing and all kinds of social programming and things like that, these things can be reduced from their functioning. If they can be reduced from their functioning, they can also be expanded. And that was the principles that we went forward with, was perceptual studies.
In other words, how far could you take it?
Yeah.
Apparently far enough to get funding to go for 20 years now.
Yes.
We were all shocked.
You had to produce results, though, really fast, so it wasn't just merely a hypothesis. You had to put your results where your mouth was eventually.
Well, you did that, right? Or it was done.
It was done, yes.
It was done. One thing that I have never understood, and to this very day do not, is that the remote viewing, when we saw Ted Koppel, it was to announce we had been doing it for 20 years, but guess what? We're not doing it anymore because it doesn't work. Well, 20 years is a hell of a long time to decide something doesn't work.
Oh, dear. Actually, when you think of the larger societal picture and the balance of powers and the secrecy that goes on with everything, would you want to have high-quality remote viewing admitted as workable?
No.
No. I was told behind the scenes as early as 1973 that even if I was told in secret or in confidentiality, that even if we did succeed at demonstrating something along these lines at Stanford, that eventually it would be obliterated because if something like that becomes good enough, then it's a threat potential against everybody's closely guarded secrets. And so, but at that time during the Cold War, you notice that the program was closed down almost immediately that the Cold War was over with.
That's right. Well, okay. Supposedly, yes.
Yes. So this kind of development wasn't needed anymore because the American effort was a response to the Soviet effort, and when the Soviet effort collapsed and went away, then there was no need for it anymore in America. So now a publicity program had to get going saying, yes, we looked at it, but it didn't work, and hoping that the 20-year period wasn't noticed.
Well, I ask every remote viewer the same question, and that is, if remote viewing really works, and they had to say it didn't work, then wouldn't it be logical to conclude that it's still going on, and probably even at a higher level, and almost every remote viewer says, no, politics killed it, and I just refuse to believe that. If it really works, then we're still doing it.
Well, if so, it's even when we were working on it, it was a black program.
Right.
You know? And it was on, especially after it got classified, which I encouraged it to be at that time, just to protect the people working with the remote viewing. But if it's going on, then it's a black program, double black, triple black, I don't know.
But well, sure,
black, so
one can imagine that easily.
Yep.
So you don't rule out the possibility that at some level it is still going on.
Oh, I don't rule it out at all, especially with regards to Japan and China. Yeah. Americans only respond to things. They very seldom take the initiative unless it involves money and territory. But interest in this is, I mean, a really big interest, big-time interested in this has been going on in Japan and China for some time.
Well, the Chinese are not exactly, other than some trade, our best friends at the moment. So if they're doing it, I would think that...
well, let's say they're messing around with it, trying to figure out so forth and so on. In my website, I have reviewed a book written by somebody who's quite knowledgeable in all that. I don't have it handy here. But it's a report on the kind of research that's been going on in China along these lines since about the early 1980s. And this gives one pause if you're interested in the future. I mean, it's quite obvious that whoever develops these kind of things to a point where they become functional, really functional, are going to have an advantage over those that don't have that. That's quite clear.
Well, if that's quite clear...
well, it's clear to me and a number of other people. But the best way to make people not be concerned is to say it doesn't work. You know, it's the same thing as like saying UFOs don't exist and ETs aren't real.
That's right.
And so, you know, you can put out this social conditioning out there that simply causes people not to think about it because it's thought to be insignificant, even if it does exist. So if it becomes, the point when it changes from being insignificant to significant is the make-break point between what's going to happen about it.
Gotcha. Hold on, Ingo. We're at the top of the hour break. Ingo Swann, the father of remote viewing, and a great natural intuitive / psychic / whatever words you want to put to it, perhaps one of the greatest, is my guest, and we're going to talk about this. our government lie to us, lack telling us the truth, deceive us, feed us disinformation? Our government?
To reach Art Bell in the Kingdom of Nye, from west of the Rockies, dial 1-800-618-8255. East of the Rockies, 1-800-825-5033. First-time callers may reach Art at 1-775-727-1222. Or use the wildcard line at 1-775-727-1295. To reach Art on the toll-free international line, call your AT&T operator and have them dial 800-893-0903. This is Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell on the Premier Radio Networks.
The man said to be the man with the greatest natural ability in the areas we've been discussing, Ingo Swann, is my guest. A rare opportunity to look into the mind of the man who began it all. We'll be right back.
From the Kingdom of Nye, more Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. Here again is Art.
All right, once again, Ingo Swann. And Ingo, welcome back. We were discussing the possibility of a current program 2 or 3 black levels deep that would still be going on in this country. And you admitted it as at least a possibility. A mutual acquaintance of ours, John Alexander, you know him?
Oh, yeah.
He called during the break, and he said, why don't you ask, I don't want to take credit for his question. He said, Art, why don't you ask Ingo if such a program, in his opinion, could be going on without him?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They don't want me around anymore.
Oh, no?
No. First of all, I'm too stubborn about a lot of things. And second of all, I have ideas of my own, and they don't want to deal with people who have ideas of their own. And I'm getting too old anyway. You know, I'm probably past my prime in all of this.
Well, let me ask you about a few of those things. What do you mean you're stubborn?
Huh?
I said, what do you mean you're stubborn? From their point of view, how so?
Well, if you work in that system, those systems, these are chains of command.
Oh, sure.
And one of the things that we came to grief over was these chains of command sent down that we were supposed to research this and that. And I would say, well, there's no use doing that because it's not going to result in anything, and I refuse to do it. And
were these bureaucrats?
Oh, they were bureaucrats. They were military people. But, there's chains of command everywhere, and people that are putting up money like to get what they think should be done. But, I'm not going to sit around and waste my time just trying to fulfill a mandate like that when it's real to me that it's never going to get anywhere.
So, in other words, put simply, a few times, you told them just to get screwed.
Well, I left SRI about 5 times.
Five times? Over
this issue. And I said, I'd really rather go back to New York and write a novel and try to earn some money or something, and I'm an artist. I just as well take this time and paint.
Well, I once got fired by a boss 6 times. Yeah. So, there you are. Ideas of your own. In other words, avenues of research that you wanted to pursue that they were not interested in. I would take it to mean that. Well, it had to be one. You see, in the early 70s, the